I've taken the trouble to put a video together of a roast, right from start to finish, right from switching on the roaster to finishing the roast and dumping it out in the cooling tray. I'd thought about putting it all in a written guide, and I'm going to do some notes, but I found with shock that people don't read 28-30 pages of user manual. Hopefully you'll find it easier to follow it all visually and sit along with me on a roast. Okay, this is the 1 kilo Gene Calf, and today I'm going to be roasting a kilogram of Brazil Dateira Savannah. Now, I've started off basically as you would at the beginning of the day. The roaster hasn't been on, it needs preheating, and the first roast is always going to be slightly different to all the subsequent roasts because the roaster gets fully warmed up during that first roast. Anyway, here's the roaster. We're going to start roasting, so first thing we've got to do, check the chaff collector, and that's empty. We want that to be empty, we don't want a fire. And after every 3 or 4 roasts you might fill it up again. We plug the roaster in, and you're going to hear a little bit of a beep as we plug it in, and the fan will come on. Now that's before we've even switched it on, so you should always unplug the roaster when you're not using it. Switch the roaster on here, and you'll see the drum position itself, does its check, and we'll set our preheat temperature to 233, which is what we feel is about the right temperature to roast this Savannah at. This display, if you can see it, shows the temperature there for preheat, the temperature of the exit air at the moment, which is obviously it's not on, so it's ambient temperature. The time we have set is 15 minutes. We'll just push that up to 16 minutes. And we can extend it or reduce it by turning that knob at any time during the roast. So we'll start the preheat, and we do that with one fairly quick press. It's not a press and hold for a second, just a press. And that starts preheating, and the preheat symbol comes on here on the roaster. You may or may not be able to see that. I've added a photo here of a previous roast, and this shows the roast temperature set at 2234. The preheat indicator on the left is lit, and the maximum preheat temperature preset by Genesis that a roaster can reach is 230 degrees. And the preheat will take a number of minutes. Now, I'm fairly sure that it would have been quite difficult to see while I was roasting, so I've put a photo in showing the tubes. Tube number 1 is a metallized foil tube carrying very hot air from the roasting chamber into the chaff collector. Tube number 2 carries all the smoke and roasting products from the chaff collector to the outside. Tube number 3 is the air from the cooling tray when the beans are being cooled, and that's plastic because the air isn't quite so hot. And number 4 is the chaff collector itself. Now we've got some buttons here, and this is important. Heater 2, which I'd forgotten to turn on. All the heater buttons should be on and glowing, to give you a quicker preheat as well, including this blue button, which is for cooling. If that button isn't on, the cooling fan won't come on automatically when the roast is dumped. So at 134 degrees now, 135, and it's going up much faster since I put heater 2 on. So probably good that I made that error. Always remember to check those 3 lights are on. Now that's a beep telling us we're at 150 degrees. Now that was probably programmed in so that people who wanted to drop beans at 150 degrees could, and start the roast off at that point. I've actually found it doesn't seem to affect the beans. You could experiment with it, but I found it seems fine to drop it in when the preset temperature is reached, and when it beeps its second time. What we're going to do, we're going to prepare for that moment now by bringing this hopper down, and if there's a button here, an actual little depressing sort of plastic button, like you'd find on a car when you open the door, the courtesy light comes on. And that button's a safety button. It means when this is down, the chamber cannot rotate. And if you do try and rotate the chamber, it'll give you an error code and bleep at you until you raise this. And the mechanism here is quite clever. I'll lift it up again. When you push it, a little arm comes out, and that pushes open the door there that allows the beans to come in. I'll pop it back down on the chamber. when I actually do release the beans, I always put a thumb here and pull at the bottom to sort of steady it so I'm not pulling it against its mounting. Let's pop the beans in the hopper. Here's a whole kilo of beans, and it likes to roast a kilo. I haven't tried weights less than a kilo, and it's the sort of hybrid type roaster that is probably best roasting at its proper 1 kilo weight. The only exception to this might be if you roast a coffee like Monsoon Malabar, which can get a bit bulky, and I haven't tried that coffee in it. Okay, we're nearly at roasting temperature now. The other thing to point out is that the roaster can also cool the beans you've dumped from the previous roast and begin its preheat and roasting cycle of the next roast while the previous roast is here cooling in the cooling tray. There's absolutely no problem with doing that. And that'll get you about 3.5 roasts per hour. Okay, we're at 220 now. We're coming very close to being able to pop the beans in. Now what we do, when it reaches the preheat temperature, the roaster will actually maintain that temperature on, off, just maintaining that preheat temperature for a while. I think it does shut down automatically if you leave it long enough. I haven't done that, obviously. You never leave the roaster unattended. But it'll keep that preheat temperature, and we tell it we're going to insert the beans by a quick press on that button, and we'll get a symbol called insert. There's the beep to tell us pretty much up to temperature now. We're a few degrees below, but we're ready to insert. So quick press, and I get INS on the display for insert. Thumb there. Just make sure all the beans are out the hopper, and because of that safety switch, we lift the hopper away, and now to start roasting, a slightly longer press, a press and a hold, that's it. And as soon as it starts to move, release the button, and we've got heating on here, and those beans are now roasting. Now, being the first roast of the day, just sometimes your first roast of the day can, especially in winter, can be a little bit longer to get the same desired colour, but don't worry about that. I'll set to 16. If it was a coffee that was taking 15 minutes, 50 seconds to roast, I'd probably actually set it to 17 and just stop the roast early by press and holding that button, which would start the dumping process of dumping the roast. Now this time coder here, you may or may not be able to see, is set in seconds. So it says 0.4 and now 0.5. That's not half a minute, that's 50 seconds. And then it'll go 1 for 1 minute, then 1.1 is 1 minute 10 seconds. So it's 1 minute now, and that end number is in seconds. And it shows in 10-second increments the roast increasing. So 1.1 is 1 minute 10 seconds. Now our temperature here at the moment is saying 197 degrees, and that'll drop a little bit. That doesn't mean the beans are anywhere near 197. What it means, the exit air, there's a thermal sensor here, and the air coming out of the roaster is at 197, 198. The beans themselves are obviously much, much cooler. And that's where this probe comes in. This ordinary analog thermal probe is probably one of the most important indicators on the machine, especially when you're roasting a new bean. Because this dips in and out of the bean mass, it's at the chamber there, it's out of the hot air stream directly, and it gives you a better indication of chamber stroke bean mass temperature. Now, what we're looking for is when that gets to about 210, and again it depends on the bean. But this bean, at about 210, 215 degrees, we want to start doing things with the roast. With other beans, it might have to reach 220 before you start doing something. And if I talk through the roast process here, what's going to happen is it's going to heat, and these beans are going to gradually change colour to straw, and you'll see that happening. Now, during that process, it's driving off the water out of the beans, and it's coming towards something we call first crack. Depending on the bean, it can happen at 10 minutes, 11 minutes, even 12 minutes. And that first crack is a fracturing of the bean as the water vapour finally comes out of it. It makes a noise, it's hard to hear on this machine, and the beans start to absorb heat less. At the moment they're soaking up a lot of heat. The reaction is what we call quite endothermic. But at first crack, the reaction becomes much less endothermic, and the beans need a lot less heat to maintain and increase their temperature. You will hear the term that beans become exothermic. They don't. Beans don't make their own heat. They always need a heat input. But at first crack, after about 20-30 seconds of first crack, they need a lot less heat input to them. And that's why there's two heater buttons here. Heater 1, heater 2. This heater 2 is your little heater, heater 1 is your big heater. Cutting out heater 2 will trim about 33% of your power away from the roast. 33% of the power not being put into the roast. So this is at 100%. When we trip that heater out, it'll be down to about 67%. Now, we're going to wait until we see for this particular bean, a chamber temperature of about 210-ish. There's a little bit of feel, a little bit of art to this, and then we're going to turn that one off. That'll happen at about 11.5 minutes, maybe 12, because it's the first roast. When we turn that off, you'll see this temperature on the display go down because your exit air temperature will reduce. But this temperature here will be maintained and even start to rise. And that's exactly what we want to happen. So I'm going to walk around here and have a little look here. Our temperature here is at about, on this dial, we have to read it as it moves, at 170 degrees, 160 degrees. And the time is about 4 minutes 50 seconds, and that's about perfect. That's about what we'd expect. That's a good indicator for the roast progressing at a satisfactory pace. Now it's important to mention this is a commercial batch roasting. You're not going to have this fine level of control over temperature and profiling. And with a kilo of beans, it's not that easy anyway to rapidly reduce or increase temperatures. Which means you've got to get it right, you've got to set it up right, you've got to anticipate. Now outside, and you probably can't see it, I'm seeing some smoke coming off the beans now for the first time. And I'm seeing chaff at about 5 minutes start to more heavily collect at the grid at the end of the roasting chamber. And there's a big flapper that just clears that grid and breaks down the chaff which goes into here. Now the other thing you can do while you're watching your roasting chamber is look out for stones, look out for black beans, look out for any foreign objects in the roast, because if you see anything now, pick them out later so it doesn't destroy people's grinders, or your own grinder if you're roasting for you. Okay, we're 6 minutes into the roast. You can see there's been a fair change in the bean colour. I'm just going to get some beans and show you. Now, I don't know if you can see, but this was the colour of the beans. Took a few out in my hand. They were sort of greeny khaki, and they're now a sort of straw, a nice straw colour. Put these back, and they've got a little bit larger, but not much. Of course, that's the other thing, as the beans approach first crack, they'll actually get larger and larger, and they swell up, and perhaps there's a 30-40% increase in size, so they tend to fill the chamber more. Which is the other reason for turning the heat out, because the fuller the chamber, the heat down, the more the trapped heat. Now we're at 7 minutes in. They're starting to get more straw-like, but still we're not expecting a lot to happen for another 3 minutes. Now while we're waiting, we talk about cleaning. I've got a small gene calf as well as this, the small 250 gram home gene calf, and I just saw a dark bean there. And that could have been from a previous roast trapped, or it could have just been a black sour bean in this, and I'll want to remove that later. I can just see it tumbling around. Anyway, yes, I've got the smaller gene calf, and as far as cleaning goes, really I don't clean the chamber very often. It's really not necessary. Depends how much you roast. You may only have to take this chamber apart to clean it once every 6 months, maybe even once a year. Basically, when the view of the beans gets difficult, clean the glass. Don't worry about the metal, that doesn't matter. That can go black as it likes inside, it's not going to hurt a thing. Even the probe's not going to really be affected. The glass, if that starts getting a film on it, how I clean my gene calf, and I guess you could clean this, is I got the spray type of oven cleaner. I get gloves, put out newspaper outside, and I spray some foam oven cleaner on the inside of the glass, get a brush, and just brush and agitate it, brush it and agitate it, then rinse it off and pop it back in, and that oven cleaner seems to get it very, very clean. Now, first, of course, you can try a sponge and a brush and washing up liquid and see how that goes, but if you find it's not cleaning it properly, use a spray of oven cleaner. Never use a Scotch-Brite or a pad, you know, those non-stick scouring pads. That's going to scratch your glass. And that's why the oven cleaner is probably a better option if you really can't get it off with a normal brush and soap and water. Okay, we're at 9 minutes now. The beans have got a noticeably dark straw colour. I'm going to check the chamber temperature, and that now is about 190, coming up towards 200. So far everything's perfect and we're quite happy. Now the other thing, when the beans have roasted and you get them into the cooling tray, there might be a little bit of oil showing here and there on the beans. Don't worry about it, that will go away, that'll get absorbed back into the bean. If they're very, very oily, then it's got too hot, or you've roasted it too quickly. But if you see the odd little bit of shininess here and there, that soon goes away as the bean cools. So our display temperature is 227, our time is 9 minutes 50 seconds. Our beans are approaching first crack, which is where we're going to, in a few minutes, start thinking about turning that heater off. And I stress again, that will be different for every bean that you roast. Now remember, if I need to add time, one click I can add a minute, one click I can reduce a minute. If I suddenly need to end the roast, press and hold for a second and the roast will end. Now the other thing you can't see up here is halogen light. And this halogen light, sort of up there, points down towards the chamber, and as we get nearer to our desired roast colour, even in daylight, even in bright sun, I plug this halogen lamp and turn it on. Can you see the difference? And what that gives me is a standard colour to reference my roast by, standard colour temperature, and it makes sure I can get all my roasts pretty much the same colour. So even though I've got great light here, but turning on this known halogen light source, it's always the same, it really helps me assess my roast colour. Now we're 11 minutes 20 seconds into the roast, still showing 227, roast is coming up to 205, and I want to get it to at least 210 before I turn off the heater. Now, when I was roasting yesterday, I was having to turn this off at about 11:30, 11:40, but because this is the first roast, I probably have to let this go to 12 minutes before I turn that second small heater off. Maybe even slightly more. Now I'm starting to get a fair bit of smoke out now, which means first crack has happened. I'm now pretty much at 210, so I'm going to pop this heater off. It's 12 minutes 10 seconds, and there's a fair bit of smoke. I can hear first crack going, a little snapping like tin foil sound, and I can see smoke outside. Now obviously you won't be dangling your hoses out of a window, you'll have yours vented through a wall, I'm sure. And there is a minimal amount of leakage there, so you may even have an extractor hood and vent it up into an extractor, whatever you have to do as part of your business. Okay, you'll see this temperature dropping. It was 227, it's now dropped to 222. However, if I check the chamber temperature, that's rising, that's 212, 213 now. So rather than going down, it's still going up. That means I got this right, I didn't turn it off too early. This is now down to 220, and eventually this and that will equalise, and that's not a problem. And we're 13 minutes 10 seconds into the roast. Now I'll probably end this roast earlier than the 16 minutes set. I may end it at 15, I may end it at 15 and a half. Just depends on the colour achieved. Bear in mind, the colour you see there, it will darken a little bit when it cools in the tray, because it's still hot. It takes a few seconds for the thing to dump the beans. But just bear that in mind. And one of the things you don't really want to be doing is under roasting, and that's a warning beep saying I've got 2 minutes to go before I reach my 16-minute time limit. We're 217 degrees there, which is pretty much the temperature being shown on this dial. Now that doesn't mean it is, it doesn't mean that that's the temperature of the beans, it just means for this roaster, those are the indicators. For your own roaster, it might be slightly different. Your roaster, you may have to have my 210 on there, maybe your 212 or your 215. My 217 on there, maybe your 219. Each roaster is an individual thing. It's going to be fractionally different. But this is what works on my roaster. It'll broadly work on yours, and you'll fine tune it depending on how yours works and your particular mains voltage at your location, which the mains voltage is going to affect the speed and heat of the roaster. Now coming up to 218, maybe 220, which is good. I don't like my roasters getting above 225 on that chamber dial, because I find that's not good, that's getting too hot. We're 15 minutes 10 seconds in. The beans are going a lovely colour now. They're a nice shade of milk chocolate. And you know, I'll want to dump these soon. I won't want to let them go too much longer. But that's absolutely perfect, these are looking. So 15 minutes 30 seconds. I'm going to give them another 15 seconds, 20 seconds, and pop them out. Okay, 15 minutes 40, press and hold, and they're now going to dump. Can you see it sometimes does a whole revolution before it does? So that was 15 minutes 40 seconds, and out they come. Now, there are no beans trapped, but if there were, this little device, I was going to make it until I found one in the box. Comes with the roaster. Oh, here's one trap. You put it in, and you just slide it around. Get any trapped beans now, so that you don't have something burning during your next roast. That's it. Now if we wanted to, we could press the preheat button again and start another roast while this is cooling. And I'll show you how we back-to-back roast in the next video. And here's the beans in the cooling tray, and they've come out lovely. Absolutely perfect.